The wind swept across the open plains, whispering through the tall grass like secrets the earth wished to keep. In the small town of Clearwater, where the mountains kissed the sky, and every sunset seemed to set the world ablaze in gold, a wedding was being forced to happen. Clara Hensley stood in front of the church, her hands trembling, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was just 19, with a heart full of dreams that had been crushed by her father's debts. He had gambled everything away, his land, his cattle, and eventually, his daughter's hand in marriage. The man she was to marry was Elijah Cole, the quiet cowboy who owned half the valley. She had heard stories about him, how he worked his ranch alone after his family was lost to a fire, how he spoke little, and how his cold eyes could make even the boldest ranch hands lower their gaze. Clara didn't want this. She didn't want to marry a man who never smiled, a man whose silence frightened her more than anger ever could. But as the vows were spoken, and the ring, a simple silver band, was slid onto her trembling finger, she knew there was no turning back. Elijah stood beside her, tall and steady, his broad shoulders outlined against the amber light streaming through the church windows. He said nothing, only nodded to the preacher, then offered Clara his arm. His grip was firm, not cruel, but his silence, it weighed heavier than chains. The carriage ride back to his ranch was long and quiet. Clara watched the endless horizon, tears blurring the golden plains, while Elijah's eyes stayed fixed ahead, on the winding dirt road that led to their new life. When they arrived, she saw the house, big, wooden, lonely. It stood strong against the wind, much like the man who owned it. Inside, everything was tidy, orderly, and silent. "This is your home now," he said simply, his voice low, gravelly, carrying the tone of a man unused to speaking. "You'll have your own room if you want. I don't expect much, just respect. I won't hurt you." That last line struck her, not because it was comforting, but because it sounded like a promise from a man who had been hurt himself. Days turned into weeks. Elijah would rise before dawn, work the cattle, mend fences, and come home only after the sun had fallen. Clara would prepare supper, often waiting for him, unsure if she should speak. He rarely did. But there was something about his silence, less cold now, more careful. One evening, she noticed his hands were bleeding from the wire fence. She rushed to fetch water, but he pulled back. "I'm fine," he muttered. She didn't listen. She took his hand gently, washing away the dirt and blood. For the first time, he looked directly into her eyes. There was no anger there, just surprise and something softer. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "I know," she whispered back. "But I want to." That moment, simple, wordless, was the first crack in the wall between them. As the days grew warmer, so did something between them. Elijah started leaving small things for her: a wildflower on the table, a new bonnet, freshly cut firewood stacked higher than before. He still didn't say much, but his kindness spoke louder than words ever could. Clara began to see that behind his quiet eyes was a man carrying pain, not pride. One night, a storm rolled in, fierce and unrelenting. The wind howled, thunder shook the walls, and Clara woke to find Elijah outside trying to secure the horses. Without thinking, she ran into the rain, her dress clinging to her skin as she helped him tie the barn doors. "You shouldn't be out here," he shouted over the wind. "Neither should you," she cried back. When the storm finally broke, they stood drenched and breathless in the doorway, the air thick with something unspoken. Elijah reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "You're braver than I thought," he said softly. "You're kinder than you let people believe," she replied. And for the first time since their wedding, he smiled. A small, broken smile that somehow healed something inside her. Weeks later, Clara learned the truth about the fire that had taken his family. He had tried to save them, had gone back into the flames 3 times, but could only pull his younger brother out before the roof collapsed. Since then, silence had been his only companion. The ranch, the solitude, those were his ways of surviving. And now she understood why he built walls so high, why he never let anyone close. One evening, as they watched the sunset together, she placed her hand on his. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she whispered. He didn't answer right away. Then he turned to her and said, "You make it easy to forget the dark." By summer's end, the fear that once shadowed her heart was gone. Clara had fallen for the man she once dreaded to marry. Their laughter now filled the home that had once been haunted by silence. Elijah would sometimes read to her by the fire, his rough voice turning soft with every word. She found herself smiling just watching him, wondering how she could have ever feared him at all. When the townsfolk saw them together, they whispered about how the cold cowboy had changed. But Clara knew the truth. He hadn't changed. He had always been kind. She just had to look close enough to see it. One evening, under a sky painted with stars, Elijah took her hand and said, "You were forced to be my wife, but I hope one day you'll, say you chose to be." Tears welled in her eyes as she smiled up at him. "I already have, Elijah," she whispered. He pulled her close, their foreheads touching as the night wind danced around them. The quiet man she once feared had become her safe place, her home, her heart.